When Jessica Meyer arrived in Redfield, the small, seemingly cozy town greeted her inhospitably. The locals seemed to avoid her gaze, whispering quietly, but no one was in a hurry to get acquainted with her. The reason for her arrival was to work in an old building on the outskirts, ominous and majestic at the same time, which once belonged to the Stillwood Psychiatric Hospital. Jessica was hired as a caretaker and manager of this place, but the building turned out to be much more frightening than she expected. The hospital itself, immersed in eternal twilight, stood almost in complete desolation. An atmosphere of an alien time clearly reigned here, high windows with boarded-up sashes, massive cast-iron doors leading to unknown rooms, and dusty archives in which no one had dug for many years. With the first steps along the empty corridors, Jessica felt invisible glances on herself. It was cold here, so that the frost penetrated to the bones. She had the feeling that someone was hiding around every corner. On the very first night, walking through this eerie building, she came across a door locked with a rusty padlock. A strange feeling arose in her mind that this door led into the building's past, into its dark and frightening secrets. Jessica herself could not explain where this feeling came from, but it was strong and inexorable. A few days passed, and Jessica began to notice more and more strange details. In the silence of the night, sounds began to be heard, so quiet that they could be taken for a figment of the imagination: muffled footsteps, light whispers, sometimes distant groans. When Jessica went to bed, the sounds became louder, as if the walls were whispering to her about the past, about the horrors hidden behind them. On the fourth night, unable to bear the tension, she decided to look through the archive, which, as she was told, kept the stories of former patients. There, among the countless boxes and dusty files, she found a stack of old photographs. Each one was more frightening than the last: people with empty eyes and carved, withered smiles, standing or sitting in dark rooms, surrounded by the cold walls of the hospital. Sometimes their faces seemed unnaturally elongated, and their eyes were filled with despair. Among these cards was one, especially creepy. It showed 3 people, dressed in striped clothes, standing in an embrace and looking straight into the camera. The caption under the photo read, "The lights behind the wall have come." It reminded her of words she had heard before on one of her nightly walks through the corridors. The longer Jessica stayed in the hospital, the stronger her sense of an unnatural presence became. One night, she heard strange sounds coming from somewhere under the building. At first, she thought it might be old pipes or just a play of shadow and light, but when the sounds began to repeat, she realized that someone or something seemed to be trying to send her a message. A few days later, she found another strange detail. Finding herself at the far end of one of the corridors, where a massive black door hung, Jessica noticed that a narrow staircase was hidden in the floor, leading somewhere down. None of the locals mentioned basements or dungeons, but her intuition made her follow these stone steps. When she went down, a long, dark corridor opened up before her eyes, almost completely engulfed in darkness. The walls seemed to breathe, creating the feeling that the building itself was alive. A strange silence surrounded her, interrupted only by distant, frightening rustlings. The light from her flashlight picked out details: weathered, peeling walls covered with strange symbols, clearly drawn by human hands. On one section of the wall, someone had written in large letters, "Lights behind the wall will come." Jessica tried to make out what these symbols could mean, but each new pattern only became more incomprehensible and frightening. She stopped at a door with a metal sign, "Isolation Cell." The door was slightly open, and from within came a faint hum, as if someone was humming something, but the voice was so muffled that the words were inaudible. Jessica gathered her courage and entered. The room behind the door resembled a cell, the walls covered in old stains and inscriptions left by the inhabitants, who apparently wanted to leave a mark. Her gaze fell on one of the messages: "We have all been here, but none have returned." She felt goosebumps, and at that moment she felt someone watching her closely. The light of the flashlight suddenly began to flicker, and a shadow appeared in her field of vision. Then she heard the slow creak of footsteps walking down the hallway. Jessica backed away in fear, but at that moment figures loomed in front of her, people with disfigured faces and empty eyes, whispering in unison, "You will not escape."